Welcome to BizBuySell's Buying a Small Business 101 webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. We had an overwhelming interest and response. Thank you for submitting a lot of great questions to us. We'll do our best to incorporate at least some of the questions that we've gotten, and to the ones that we cannot get to in this 45-minute webinar, we will post the answers on our blog or on our website, and we'll make sure to get to you. My name is Luba Kagan, and I'm Strategic Partner Manager at BizBuySell. And today we're honored to have Ed Pendarvis join us. Ed, is like an oracle of Main Street small businesses. That has over 30 years of experience in buying and selling small businesses. Ed has a few books under his belt around all of this process, and we couldn't be more thrilled to have you with us. So thank you, Ed, for sharing your wisdom.
It's a pleasure to be here in beautiful San Francisco. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. Those are two of America's favorite cities. And I've been doing this for a long time. Because I sold Moses when he first heard of goats, and he stiffed me on the commission. So since then, I've been trying to refine my ability to help people buy and sell businesses and make sure everybody works for all those sales. I'm glad to be here because we want 2017 be the year that you go into business for yourself and part of the American dream of owning your own business. And we'll see if we can hopefully make some hints that will help you get there.
Well, Ed, I only have 15 years of experience in buying and investing in small businesses. I don't know Moses personally, but one thing I can tell you in my experience from buying businesses of different range, starting from bigger sized businesses to smaller sized businesses, that there's a tremendous difference in big business versus Main Street business. And I know you love sharing. At least let's set the stage for our listeners so they understand.
That's so important, Luba. It's not surprising. Everything you study in school and business schools and things, everything you see on television, newspaper, is all about big business, publicly traded companies, and stock market companies, we call them. And we dealing with small business, what we call Main Street business, that are privately owned, and there's a huge difference. And a couple of the differences we'll mention just getting rules, setting the ground rules a little bit today. One is a big business, publicly traded company. They've got two ways of making money. Let's take Coca-Cola, for instance. They've got a wonderful company, but they got two ways of making money. They sell their product or service all over the country, all over the world, and that's one way of making money. And the second way of making money is they sell corporate shares of stock. So if they sell 1 million shares of stock, $30 a share, whatever the stock value is, that's a whole barrel of money they just made selling stock, as well as selling their product or service. We come down Main Street business, there's only one way of making a living, or making earnings, and that's through selling their product or service. They're not selling shares of stock. And two huge things that are different is since you're selling shares of stock, the publicly traded company wants to show earnings, wants to show how well we're doing, and they want you to buy their stock. A privately held business, they sell in their product or service, you don't buy the shares of stock. And so the financial records of a big business are done to show how well they're doing. But let me get you to think about this. Most folks that work for a big company, they've seen their prospectus and their annual meeting and their good information on how well they're doing stock-wise, but you've never seen their tax returns. You never will. That's why General Electric can make $5.2 billion in pre-tax profits. And when they work it through their tax return, they end up paying no taxes because there's no profit. A small business, their financial records are primarily done to minimize taxes. They aren't done to sell the business. And so in looking at a business, you're going to find that there's a lot of information in the financial data, but you have to know what you're looking at.
Correct. And also financial terms are always confusing. There is a difference, everyone in corporate world knows what EBITDA is, what it stands for. But if you ask a business owner that's operating a great business, but a small business, what's your EBITDA, they may look at you and say, well,
what are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
In our world of small business, instead of EBITDA, which is earnings for interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, what we deal with, the real earnings of business, we call it seller's discretionary earnings. Sometimes we call it seller's discretionary cash flow. Oftentimes I refer to it just owner's benefit. In other words, if I sat in your chair, Mr. Owner, and I ran the business like you run it, did about the same amount of sales you did last year, same basic expenses, how much could I make? Because that's what a buyer wants to know is, if I buy this business, how much can I make? And we're going to show you how to arrive at that in this webinar.
Fantastic. So let's start with first things first. How do you start? Where do you start?
Well, this is a great place right here where we are at BizBuySell. BizBuySell is by far the largest, has 47,000 businesses listed around the country and around the world, and a great deal of information based on comparables and things. And you can narrow down to the area you're looking at, the type of business you're looking at, sales, the size of businesses based on sales and based on earnings and price ranges. But you're not interested in 47,000, you're interested in your area and the type of business you're looking at, and that's what we're going to address a little bit today. The best place to start is BizBuySell.
What are some other resources? What are some other venues of getting the businesses?
I'm a big advocate of most of the listings are handled by business brokers that work for the seller and have listed the business. And you see a business you're interested in, I'm a big advocate of getting in touch with that broker and going to see the broker, but we'll talk about that a little more. But focus on companies that are listed that you're interested in. The International Business Brokers Association has got a lot of good information, and their local affiliates of the IBBA, such as California Association of Business Brokers, Texas Association of Business Brokers. And sometimes you'll have for sale by owner. The process of buying a business is what we're talking about today, and it's important that you follow this process. If you look, say, at the medical profession, the process is you've got examination, diagnosis, and then prescription. You can't prescribe something if you hadn't examined that. And looking at a business, I don't think you ought to either decide to buy it or not buy it if you hadn't at least looked at the business. That's the first step that we're going to take, and we'll follow that through with Dale.
So would you say that the heart of the search process, our buyers really need to understand that it's learn, filter, and ask more questions, and it's an iterative process. And here we've provided initial set of filters that you want to consider as you are searching through the businesses.
Look at a business that's established, that's usually a lot better than a startup. It already has trained employees, a customer base, and cash flow. It has a product or service that's proven itself in the market. And very importantly, that owner has made a living out of that business for 3, 5, or 15 years. Look at the size and range of the business. Does it provide an income range that would work for you? Is it in a price range that would work for you? It can be negotiated in terms and conditions that might work for you. Will it provide a lifestyle that would work? And one question I always ask too, is very important, is we want to know why the seller is selling that business. If it's such a good business, how come it's for sale? And we always ask that, and we want to know that, so do you. When you have identified some businesses that are interesting to you, one of the things I'm going to suggest you do and challenge you to do, quite frankly, is get from behind that computer and just getting information on the business. Because when you ask for information on the business, normally what's sent to you is the financial information. As we said earlier, that financial information was primarily done to minimize taxes. Not sure how well the business is doing. And we may even have recast the information and things there. But it's so important to go see the business. And you're just looking at financial data, you'll never buy anything, because that doesn't show you the emotional involvement that's involved of going and putting your work life in a business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So you want to go see the business and see if it might work for you. So call the broker, email the broker to get further information on the business that you're interested in. You probably have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That's fine. And if you're interested, though, go see the broker. That's the biggest mistake I think people make, is they just get the financial information and say, well, this doesn't make sense. They're asking too much. I don't have that much. And the financials, I can't see where they're making enough money. So go see the broker, and very important, go see the business. Go see the business. Start with the fact that it's making somebody a living that wouldn't still be in business, and see if it might work for you. Ask some more questions of the seller and the broker, and evaluate whether or not it'll work for you in your initial assessment. Learn enough on the initial information to eliminate the business if it's not something you're interested in, or drill down deeper if it is something that you're interested in.
I guess it's important for our buyers to know that at this stage, you're just trying to learn enough to eliminate on these initial filters. There is no way you can learn everything right away, and it's only preliminary due diligence.
That's exactly right, and that's why I invite people to go look at several businesses perhaps and do some comparison shopping there.
It's a law of large numbers, and you need to look at a number of businesses
That's right.
to even understand what are you looking for, what do you want to...
What is the best opportunity for you? You have to go out on some dates or you'll never get married. You got to go on that first date.
We've provided here additional filters, like deeper filters. These are certainly the questions that I've constantly asked when I've been buying businesses over my 15 years of experience. We can drill into each one of these questions, and it'll be its own webinar. For the interest of time, we wanted to share this information so you have it as you're going through this process. But unfortunately, unless we do another 3-4 webinars, we won't be able to get into these.
One of the big things of this, though, I invite people, it's very important. An existing business normally has an immediate cash flow. That's a critical issue to a buyer. Because what you're buying is you're buying earnings. No matter what type of business it is, you need to make a living out of that business. And an existing business should have an immediate cash flow. We'll talk about that. One of the 3 areas or main areas of focus that I suggest you look at, looking at a business, Luba, is I always tell people focus on the business, not the financials, except what financials tell you. What I mean by that, if you look at the business, if you don't like it, quite frankly, it doesn't matter what the financials show. You see what I mean? You're not going to buy it. You're not going to buy a house you don't like. You're not going to buy a car you don't like. You're not going to marry a woman you don't like. Oh, man, you're not going to buy a business you don't like either. So that's one of the first steps to focus on there. When you do look at the financials, which certainly you will, look at the top line, gross sales, not the bottom line. Bottom line has been done to minimize taxes. That number may not be appropriate at all. What we're looking at the bottom line, we're talking about the real bottom line is earnings, owner's benefit. That's not in the financials that we look at for tax return. The top line, though, does give you the trend of sales and the volume of sales, and that's very important. What I found is a pretty good rule of thumb is you can make 10 to 20% on your gross sales. That's the ballpark. So somebody shows they're doing gross sales of $400,000 a year, you can make $40,000 to $80,000 perhaps. Doing $600,000, $60,000 to $120,000. And if the seller represents that that's what they're making, that's probably so, subject to your further due diligence. And then very importantly, focus on what you're going to do with the business after you buy. I always invite buyers to do that. Don't just look at what they've done with it. You can't change how they've run the business the last 15 years or nickel. What you can change is what you're going to do with the business after you buy it. Look at Ray Kroc when he bought McDonald's. He didn't start McDonald's. He bought an existing business, and then he developed it into the huge corporation it is. I invite you to do the same thing. Look at it. What are you going to do with the business? That's probably the most important thing. In fact, if I were to suggest that you weigh the decision, I'd say put way more, 70% of the weight on what you're going to do with the business after you buy it, rather than about 30% of what the seller's done with it. I can't change that at all. I can change what we do with it.
Because ultimately you're buying future earnings, future earning potential.
The actual definition of what's the value of a business is the perceived value of the future earnings. And so look at that, because that's where your value is from owning that business. And remember, the business has been around 3 to 5 years or longer, 19 years. It's making somebody a living. They wouldn't still be in business. So they're paying the rent every month. They're paying the employees every week. It's a well-stocked store. It's a well-run business. That's the value of an existing business to sell, and look at it from that standpoint. Rule of thumb, too, is probably the biggest question a buyer wants to ask is, if I buy this business, if I buy this job, how much can I make? And the answer to that really starts out with 3 specific steps. One is identifying how much the seller is making now, not for tax purposes, but the real cash flow, real earnings of the business. And that's where that 10 to 20% rule gives you a kind of rule of thumb basics for what you should be able to make out of business. Then, of course, it would be less whatever the new debt service is in your purchase, whether you owe money back to the bank or Uncle Charles or to the seller. That'll be a debt service that's now not being paid, so you'd be less that. But then, very importantly, plus what the buyer is going to do to improve the business going forward. And if you would use those 3 steps, that'll give you a pretty good idea of what your earnings would be. An example I got there, we're right familiar with food service and restaurants and things there. This is where I'm getting that 10 to 20% rule. Let's just say you got gross sales of $1 million on a restaurant. Food costs are usually about 30%, so it's $300,000. Labor costs is about 30%, $300,000. Your rent factor is normally about 10% of gross sales, ballpark of that. And your administrative costs, that's insurance, advertising, electric bill, anything not those other expenses, another about 10%. Well, that's 30, 60, 70, 80% of expenses already gone. So what's left to the owner for owning the business is that 10 to 20%, potentially. Now, if you've got a manager to run it, they run absentee, they might not be making any money much. But usually if you run that business right, that's the potential earnings of a business is 10 to 20% of its gross sales.
It's a great rule of thumb to remember.
And a lot of time too, another question that always comes up is, what's the value of a business? What pricing and things should I use that?
That question comes up consistently and always, and it's a mystery, and it's not a science, it's an art, but we would love to get your wisdom around what are the rule of thumb for small businesses in terms of valuations and pricing of the business.
Luba, here's the thing that works pretty well. In fact, this is, you see the chart that's on the slide there, will kind of reaffirm this. There are 2 approaches to value that work pretty well. And one of them is a percentage of gross sales. And again, sales drives value. I always invite folks, if y'all got something to write with, write that down. Sales drives value. If there's no sales, there's no value. Doesn't matter.
You don't have sales, you don't have a business.
But if you look at gross sales of a business, normally the selling price is going to end up being around 50 to 60% of its gross sales. And that's been a trend for several years.
We've been tracking that for many, many years.
Oh, I do a training course at IBBA for 15 years. The multiple of earnings approach is the second one, probably the most used, is businesses average sell 2.3 times earnings. So 2 to 3 times earnings, 2 to 2.5 times earnings is a reasonable approach to value based on earnings. And if you use those 2, that would give you a pretty good idea of what a range of value ought to be for that business. Not surprising, a seller wants as much as he can get, so he may very well be asking more than that because they want to get as much as they can get out of the business. I agree with it. But if you're looking at it as a buyer, that would be a range that would make sense from a buyer's perspective.
Actually, that leads me to a great question. We've had quite a number of questions around, like, help us at negotiating a sales price when an asking price the seller wants is far above even the highest valuation methods. What can we do? It's certainly the case, especially in rural areas for Main Street businesses, for small businesses where there's small populations, there's not many comps available. Any words of wisdom? Yeah,
you'd still come back to your gross sales on that business because that would normally drive that value of the business, and you'd come back into your multiple range that you're talking about there. A key issue with a buyer is going to be the down payment range. Seller always wants more. In fact, seller may be asking all cash. Buyers normally have a limit of how much they can write a check for the down payment. I always say that down payment comes out of what I call HIP National Bank. So how much can you write a check for? And Americans historically are not big savers. We make $100,000 a year, we spend $110,000. We make $200,000 a year, we spend $210,000. Now, if you ever make $300,000 a year, you become a Republican, and Republicans can always save money. So, but usually the amount of money that the buyers got down payment that they can write a check for in most small business is probably $50,000 to $150,000. So that's going to be the down payment. That's all I got. That's going to be the check I can write a check for. Because and from a standpoint there, unless I can get bank financing, that's going to be the down payment. The seller will have to finance the balance. All right, let's go to the next one.
A great lead to our next step in this buying process, making an offer. And as you say, making an offer is just the first step at arriving on price, term, and conditions.
Not surprisingly, as I said, the seller wants as much as he can get or she can get. So the asking price may be more in all cash, no risk. I want all my money and I'm going moving to Phoenix. I'm retiring or something like that. The buyer still doesn't have but $50,000 to $150,000 down, no matter how much you want all cash and want to pay. So if you look at a business and the asking price is more, probably than it's going to sell for. If you like the business, I always tell the buyer, make an offer. Make an offer based on the down payment range that you can put down. And I'd ask the seller to finance the balance for 7 to 10 years. That's the normal range of a loan with the SBA is 7 to 10 years on a business. And the buyer can't write a check for more than he's got for his down payment. So I already know what the down payment is going to be, is how much the buyer can put down. And ask the seller to finance the balance for 7 to 10 years at a reasonable interest rate. And a written offer with a $1,000 refundable deposit. Amazingly, with a written offer, the seller will respond to that offer in writing. And almost always the asking price will come down a little bit to a more realistic number that absolutely the seller, I'm not taking this now, I got to have this. But we're going to see if not only the price works for both sides, but price, terms, and conditions work. I'll pay you that much if you'll take this much down and finance the balance over 7 to 10 years. And my cash flow of the business has got to carry the debt service and give me enough money to live on. So those are my negotiating points as a buyer. It's got to make sense. But if you make him an offer in writing, hopefully he'll respond in writing, or she will, and we'll see what the real selling price of the business is, not just the asking price.
One thing when considering making an offer in terms of down payment, and I want all of the buyers to keep that in mind, you have to make sure that you have enough cash, not just for the down payment, but also for the working capital needs.
Very important fact. Oftentimes the seller, I want more down payment. But from the buyer's standpoint, you've got to have the money, or she does, for the down payment. Got to have working capital. Got to have the house payment for the next couple of months, and car payments, and kids going back to school thing. And so you don't take a buy out of cash. You've got to have some working capital. Normally an SBA loan will include actually some component of working capital. That's very critical.
So once you make an offer in writing to the seller, next you see what
that's where your negotiations of your price, terms, and conditions actually begin, with a written offer. See, without a written offer, you can tell the seller, you're asking too much. Well, okay, so make him an offer and see what he comes back with. And then, very importantly, as you're going into due diligence, you know what the real asking price is, not just the asking price, what the real selling price is. So you've got a target for your due diligence to see if it makes sense to them. Don't be surprised if the seller wants more down payment. They always want more down payment. This may be where the buyer has to get money from a bank or a third party, perhaps with an SBA loan. We're seeing a lot more loans the last few years than we used to in small business where the SBA will guarantee the loan. And that guarantee becomes the security component for the bank. Bank's got to have two things. Got to have proven debt repayment ability, and you got to have security. And the security is not the business assets, because the bank can't run that. Security is the SBA guarantee. And the seller sometimes wants, I'll finance it for 2 years. You can't take the debt service out of that. That's too aggressive a debt service. There's not enough cash flow for the buyer to live on. Got to be able to make a living, and got to be able to carry the debt service. So negotiate something that makes sense for both sides.
And as you say, all deal points are subject to negotiation.
Listen, everything's subject to negotiation. I don't care what they say. Most businesses are not going to sell for the total asking price, and certainly not going to sell for all cash at that number. Most businesses also are going to be negotiated to price, terms, and conditions that work for both sides.
Which brings us to the next point that we wanted to address. Financing is a major component. If you don't have financing, you don't have a deal, you cannot buy a business. What are the rules of thumb for financing?
I always say financing is mother's milk of a transaction. It makes it work, and it's very, very important, critical to the issue. And most deals, it seems in small business, the IBBA and the tracking we do, and with BizBuySell, usually end up with about a third down from the buyer of purchase price, and about a third provided by the bank or some lender, Uncle Charles or whoever we get that, and then a third provided by the seller in owner financing. And oftentimes with the bank loan and the down payment combined, there's enough down payment that the seller will now finance part of it. And the bank, the SBA in most cases now, is actually requiring that the seller take back 10 or 15% and what's called a standby note that earns interest, but there's no payments for the first 2 years or 5 years, something like that. The bank, and I feel this way too, it's a good idea. I'd like to see a deal where both the buyer and the seller walk away from the closing table with a huge vested interest in continued success of the business. And the buyer's going to do that because they've committed to it. The seller's going to do that because they got a loan component back there, and that works for everybody. In many cases, the price is more important to the seller. Terms and conditions are more important to the buyer. I'll pay you $400,000 if you'll take 70 down and finance the balance, or if I can get some more from the bank. And remember, just like you said, that the buyer needs working capital as well as the down payment range. All right.
And actually, if you can speak a little bit about what have you seen the successful ratio of down payment relative to annual earnings, stuff that works, stuff that makes sense.
This is one of the most important things that you're negotiating toward, is if you can end up with, let's say a buyer's got 70,000 he can put down. If you can buy a business, you can put down 70,000 and make 70,000 a year, and the business carry the debt service, that's a 100% return on your money. You can put down 100,000, make 100 a year, put down 120,000, make 120, put down 60, make 60. That 101 ratio of down payment to earnings is a critical issue that I try to end up in a negotiated deal. And if my buyer can write a check for 100,000 but buy a business that makes $100,000 a year, and the business carries the debt service, that's a 100% return on your money. That ought to work for everybody.
That's terrific.
All right. Going into negotiation a little bit further, you're ready now to do your final due diligence, you might say. And if you hadn't already engaged a CPA or an accountant to help you verify some of the financial information, I'd certainly recommend this at this time. You want to verify the earnings, not only looking at the tax return, but P&L and perhaps bank statements sometime. One way or another, the seller's got to demonstrate to the buyer and accountant, if you got that, and verify the seller's representation both of gross sales and representation of owner's benefit. You also want to make sure you look at any in-place contracts or obligations and the customer mix to make sure there's not a significant concentration of customers that could be dangerous if you lost that customer. Verify the lease information. We're dealing with a third party there. And we'd end up with an industry non-compete that's acceptable to everyone, and a training and transition period for new management that's acceptable to both. And as you're getting ready to close, one of the last things we do is verify that there's a normal level of inventory in the store as part of the purchase price. We close on the deal and the store is ready to be open tomorrow. We verify all equipment's in working order, and we're ready then with everything to close the loan and close the purchase price and take over new ownership.
And on due diligence, I mean, we can do a whole webinar drilling in each of every one of these points.
Absolutely.
But that's going to be a webinar 201, 301. We can't get to.
There's several webinars, and then all of this we're talking about. That's exactly right. Hopefully it would be helpful to both buyers and sellers.
Correct.
You know, a business deal's got to work for both the buyer and the seller. Or it probably won't work. We're not dealing with a foolish buyer. No, I don't want to be. And we're not dealing with a foolish seller. We're dealing with people that are putting real money and life savings in this. This has got to work. So we're going to try to put together a deal that works for both buyer and seller.
Ed, you shared with us a fantastic real-life example, you know, that further proves that tax returns do not tell the whole story, and it's not all about the financials. Financials are an important component, but especially in Main Street businesses, you really need to understand, talk to the seller, and really see the full story of the business.
But that's one of the most frustrating things, I think, for buyers, is they think they need to see the 3 years financials and there's the story and I can see where the earnings are. And normally the earnings are there because the fellow's been in business for how many years. And he's got house payments and car payments and kids in school and things like that, but she does. But here's a tax return of a business we actually sold 2 or 3 times over the years, but a good business. But I use this as a training thing with my brokers when I'm training brokers, because here's an absolute tax return that shows, if you look at the top line, a little over $1 million in sales, and sure enough, look at the bottom line. For tax purposes, this business lost $6,500. They didn't lose $6,500. They lost $6,500 for tax purposes, legal tax purposes. And if I invite you to look at line, I think number 7, compensation to officers was $30,000. And so just looking at this tax return, here's a business at $1 million in sales. As we recast the numbers, the owner had a car they were running through the business, a kid's car they were running through the business, health insurance, life insurance, trips they took, depreciation, add back all of the circumstances that were provable, the actual cash flow of this business was over $100,000. And legally, the owner's paying taxes on $24,000, sub-S corporation, and it made, she had a salary of $30,000 less $6,500 loss, legally paying tax on $24,000, and the business has an owner benefit for the family of well over $100,000. And there's the tax return. Now, if I just sent you that tax return, and you sit on the other side of the computer and say, send me the financials, and I sent you that, so why would I look at this? This lost money. No, it didn't. It lost money for tax purposes. And just like I said earlier, General Electric on $5.2 billion in pre-tax profit 2 years ago paid 0 in taxes. And our new president, Donald Trump, who I like, hadn't paid taxes in several years because it's not profitable. The tax law has got to be rewritten. I'm excited about that. But we have to deal with it as it is right now. And so what people do in their financials, their biggest thing is to minimize taxes except for the cash flow. And what we're interested in is if I buy this business, how much can I make? And we need the seller to demonstrate that to us. And through negotiations, help end up putting a deal together that works for both buyer and seller. Then we've got something that makes sense for everybody and works.
That's why you always say you've never met an accountant that recommended buying a business.
I've been in business 35 years. I've never once had an accountant recommend anybody buy a business. Because if you look at the value drivers of a business, let's just look real quick. Location's a value driver. The furnished fixing equipment that produce that product, that's a value driver. The inventory is a value driver. The trained employees are certainly a value driver. The existing cash flow, the customer base, all of that's a huge value of the business. The lease agreement and different things there, all of those are values, including the financials. When you just look at the financials like an accountant does, or sometimes like a bank does, they hadn't seen the business. They're just looking at the financials. They show a $6,500 loss. Not surprisingly, the accountant's going to say, based on what I see here, I can't recommend you do that. Now, if you want to buy it, I'll say, well, here's what I say as a broker. Look at the gross sales. Look at that top line, doing $1 million in sales. If you run that business right, you should be able to make 10 to 20% on your gross sales. And the seller's representation provable, they're making over $100,000. But that's pretty good affirmation of what we're talking about there. But if you look at the bottom line, it has no relationship to the value of the business.
Tax return-wise, the owner paid taxes on $24,000. That seems relevant.
Sure. We've had a question come in specifically for the slide, so I would be happy if Ed addresses it. And the question is, why does the owner pay taxes on $24,000?
Because if you look at number 7, their compensation to officers, the officers' salary, if you will, was $30,000. But they lost, it's a sub-S corporation, and it lost $6,500 for tax purposes. So they're legally paying taxes on $24,000. And that's just an owner's benefit of well over $100,000. That's the advantage of owning your own business. A lot of times the owner will run their cars through the business, their wife's car through the business, trips they take through the business, sometimes the annual meetings and things. And they expense out as much as they can with pre-tax dollars, not post dollars. And if General Electric can earn $5.2 billion from pre-tax profits and pay no taxes, you see, the tax code that's what it is. So if you got a good accountant, their job is to minimize taxes, not to show how much the business is earning, because you're not selling stock, you're selling the product or service.
Again, Ed, we've had a number of great questions come in. So you can just clearly verify, why is the owner's benefit $100,000?
And then, and of course, there's a classic example of looking at the top line, not the bottom line. Because her earnings for the last few years have been right around $1 million. So that business is doing $1 million in sales. And you need to sit down with the seller and recast the numbers. And we call recast, we add back the owner's benefit, which would be the
$30,500
there. She paid her son $100 a week. He really didn't work there, so we had that back. Sometimes you'll have a family member that used to work in the business. Now they're off at college and they're still getting paid $150,000 a year. So we had that back. So we recast the numbers based on the seller's warranties and representation of how they run in the business.
So in other words, you sit down with the seller and you review all the numbers.
Absolutely.
So when you're recasting those numbers, that means if that business was run, it's called professionally,
yep,
or as a public company, you wouldn't put all of these additional benefits that are in theory tangentially.
In fact, even using this same number, let's say that she showed $100,000 in profit, she'd have to pay $35,000 in taxes right now.
Yeah.
And we're doing it this way, she doesn't have to pay any taxes except on that $24,000 component. And that's absolutely the tax code legal.
See, of course.
And that's why when looking at a business, when you sit behind your computer, classic example, and say, just send me the last 3 years tax return and let my accountant look at them, and you do not go see the business, you don't know what you're looking at. That's not an accurate portrayal of the correct information as far as the value of that business.
Mm.
What I want to know and what you want to know is what are the earnings of that business. If I buy this business, how much could it make? And I want the seller and the broker to show us that.
Which brings us to our next point, and one of the last points in the process, and that's what are the rules of thumb around reps and warranties of the seller.
This is very important. The closing document that we deal with in this is going to be probably an asset purchase agreement. We normally buy assets for a business. We're not buying liabilities. We're not buying the stock of the corporation like you would with a big business. We're buying the assets. Furniture, fixing equipment, inventory, trademark, trade names, any kind of asset that would include the name and things there, tangible and intangible assets. But the seller in the closing document is going to make his warranties and her warranties and representations of all the information they provided to the buyer, including the financial information, warranties and representation, survives closing. One of the reasons this deal worked that I had on the screen a minute ago, we negotiated the deal, started off asking $250,000. We negotiated a deal of $190,000 with $90,000 down, and the seller financed $100,000 for 10 years. That's the seller putting their money where their mouth is. And in negotiation of the deal, price, terms, and conditions, the buyer believes correctly that if the seller lend me $100,000, I think she's telling me the truth about what she's talking about this business. And when you look at it, all of the information is not provided by the buyer, the seller's accountant. The information comes from the seller, who turned in their financial information to the accountant to file a tax return. The 3 areas of tax return level, you might say. The highest, we have a publicly traded company has an audited statement. Yep. And you've got a reviewed statement. We are normally dealing with what's called a compiled statement. In other words, here's all my stuff, my shoebox. I turn it into my accountant, and they file a tax return. The only thing I'm interested in is I don't have to write a big check for taxes. An audited statement, all publicly traded companies have an audited statement. Now, I caution folks to realize this. Enron had an audited statement. WorldCom had an audited statement. AIG had an audited statement when they were going over the cliff. So did Wachovia. So did Lehman Brothers. Everybody had an audited statement. So just having an audited statement in financials doesn't necessarily equate to value. The reality of the value is going to be a negotiated deal between the buyer and seller in a business that will make you a living. And if you can work out a business that you like, and I think that's probably one of the most important things. If folks can line up what they like to do with what makes them a living, they can get a home run. Mm. You ever see a sports person or a doctor or an athlete or a singer or something that every time they interview them, they seem to like what they're doing? That's one of the reasons I think they're so successful, don't you? If you hate to get up and go to work every day, you got a problem, and I don't care what kind of business it is, you see. So look for a business that you like and would be proud to say you own, and see if you can put together price, terms, and conditions through honest and friendly negotiations that work for both you and the seller.
Absolutely. One thing that I want to point out to our potential buyers is the reality, even if the seller starts, I want all cash, I want to get out of the business, in reality, 90% of businesses that are sold will be financed at least in part by the seller. So keep that in mind.
That's the way, and it goes back to the buyer simply doesn't have enough money to cash out. It's not okay, if you want $400,000, I'll give you $400,000. I don't have $400,000. I've got to deal with a down payment that I can pay. There are a lot of small businesses that we cannot get SBA financing, cannot get bank financing. So without that, then the only person logically to finance the business is the seller, which actually is good, because when you look at the reason the bank, two things they got to have is security and proven debt repayment ability. Bank doesn't have security, they can't run the business. They don't understand the financials. Look at the seller. Who knows more about running that business than the seller? So if you didn't pay him, they could take it back over and run it, sell it again. They don't want to, but they could. And as far as the cash flow is concerned, who knows more about the actual earnings, the real earnings, the owner's benefit, than the seller does. So the very fact that the seller will lend you some money on the business, or that they won't lend you money on the business, sometimes tells you more about the business than anything else. So we find, but don't expect the seller to lend you money he hadn't met you. That's again why you got to go see the business, meet with the seller and their wife or husband. And when I go to, I ask my buyer and their wife or husband to come to that meeting after hours. Let them walk you through the business. Look at all the furniture, fixing equipment. Look at the inventory. Let them tell you their story, including, very importantly, is why you sell in this business. What is such a good business? How come you sell it? Most of the time, folks sell the business, they're retiring, the owner's ill, or something that caught cancer, my wife's ill, we're moving back home to take care of mama. Something's come up in there that won't need to sell the business. So let's ask them that. That's a valid question.
Your story needs to make sense.
Yeah.
I wanted just to briefly touch on and provide the information for our buyers. You know, you always say, of course, you can buy an independently operated business, but there's also another option. You can always buy a franchise. So you are an owner of the business, but at least you have some manuals and some backing.
And you've got a proven track record of success. In other words, if you buy a donut franchise, got 2,000 other stores, there's a pretty good chance you open up that store and use that system and name and everything. So now you do have a cost for that on the royalty, but usually the success rate of franchises equals the success rate of an existing business. And incidentally, if you buy a startup, this is a huge difference. A startup business, 60 to 65% of the time is not still in business after 5 years. You buy an existing successful business, and buy it right, or you buy a successful franchise, 90 to 95% of the time you're still in business after 5 years. That's a huge turnaround of risk. You know, and a lot of times folks will use the word entrepreneur. I think that's an overused phrase. An entrepreneur is a risk taker. I don't want to risk. This is my life savings. This has got to work for both buyer and seller.
It has to make sense. We got a lot of questions around sharing additional resources for buyers to be able to help through the process of buying a business. So we just wanted to provide this information. We've provided a link to an amazing International Business Brokers Association where you can find really qualified professional business brokers, and you can reach out to them specifically, especially if you're looking for a business in your specific location. There is another additional resource, and these are small business development centers. They're also local, usually located at local universities in your area. And these are centers that are sponsored by the government, and that have counselors that are specifically trained to work with Main Street business owners and operators, but also they have folks that may be interested in selling a business, or if you stop by a small business development center in your local area, you never know what you may find out, but they're an excellent resource. Likewise, Ed Pendarvis has put out a 12-step process of buying a small business, and you can find that through our premium membership on BizBuySell, where Ed goes through in more depth all the steps that we've gone through. And you can also drill down and get more information through Ed's Business Buyer University. We hope these resources are helpful to you. I know that we are right at the time that we said we're going to be. It's 45 minutes after we started. This is our contact information, mine and Ed's, and the one thing that I can tell you about Ed, if you call him, he responds. If you email him, he responds. I don't know when Ed sleeps, but he is absolutely amazing. Feel free to send us additional questions, and hopefully if we get your feedback and we know that what you heard is useful and educational for you, and you want us to drill down into additional topics or specific topics, we're happy to host more of these webinars. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Been a pleasure to be with you on the webinar, and let's make 2017 the year that you get in the business for yourself and get a part of the American dream of owning your own business, and make sure it works for you and works for your family. Best of luck to you, and please contact us any way we can help you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.